The applause started before the lie was finished. Porter Gonzales, 42, worked as a senior data systems analyst in a Seattle consulting firm. Most people in the room knew him only as the quiet man who carried a homemade lunch, drove an aging Camry, and rarely spoke during meetings. They assumed Derek Whitmore was the genius behind the company's biggest client turnaround. What they didn't know was that every chart on the screen had begun on Porter's laptop. Then the first slide appeared. Derek smiled and said, "3 months ago, I built this solution from the ground up." A sharp crack came from the pen in Porter's hand. If you're watching from somewhere in the world, drop your country and local time in the comments. I'm always curious to see where these stories are reaching. And if you enjoy stories about quiet people who refuse to stay invisible, consider subscribing. Tomorrow's story might remind you why patience can be more powerful than revenge. The North Star Freight Systems account had a reputation inside Meridian Harbor Consulting. Not a good one. People called it the graveyard account. 3 project managers had rotated through it in 18 months. 2 had left the company. 1 had transferred to another division after a client executive publicly challenged his numbers during a quarterly review. North Star wasn't a small customer. It operated distribution hubs across 12 states. More than 4,000 trucks moved through its network every week. The company handled everything from industrial equipment to retail inventory. Its annual consulting contract with Meridian Harbor was worth nearly $48 million. And it was falling apart. Late deliveries had climbed above 21%. Warehouse congestion was getting worse every month. Customers were beginning to leave. Nobody wanted responsibility for it, especially Derek Whitmore. The opportunity arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning in February. The leadership team gathered in a glass conference room overlooking Elliott Bay. A red dashboard glowed across the screen. Every performance indicator pointed downward. Richard Sloan, Meridian Harbor's CEO, stood with folded arms. "This account is becoming a serious problem," he said. Silence followed. Nobody volunteered. Nobody offered solutions. Porter Gonzales sat near the end of the table. As usual, he wasn't expected to say much. Derek broke the silence. "We need someone technical to clean up the data first." His eyes drifted toward Porter. A few people nodded immediately. The decision took less than 30 seconds. Porter received the assignment before lunch, not because people believed he could save the account, because they believed he could absorb the failure. By 2 o'clock, a folder appeared in his inbox. North Star _recovery _project. 300 gigabytes of reports. 2 years of shipping records. Operational logs. Customer complaints. Forecasting spreadsheets. Meeting transcripts. Most employees would have felt punished. Porter simply opened the first file. That evening, employees began leaving the office around 5. The 14th floor slowly emptied. Lights switched off section by section. At 6:30, Porter was still working. At 8:15, he ordered a black coffee from the lobby cafe. At 9:40, security made its first round. Porter barely noticed. The data was beginning to tell a story. Not the story executives believed. Everyone assumed North Star had a transportation problem. Porter wasn't convinced. He spent days tracing delivery routes, then warehouse throughput, then inventory movement, then demand forecasts. He ignored assumptions. He followed numbers. Patterns started emerging. Small ones at first, then larger, then impossible to ignore. A distribution center outside Denver kept appearing. Again, and again, and again. The warehouse wasn't failing because trucks arrived late. Trucks arrived late because the warehouse couldn't process inventory quickly enough. Executives had spent almost 2 years treating symptoms. Nobody had found the source. Porter opened a fresh notebook. Across the first page he wrote 4 words. find the actual bottleneck. The next 3 weeks disappeared. Days blended together. Morning became afternoon. Afternoon became night. He built models, deleted them, started over, ran simulations, compared outcomes, cross-checked forecasts, validated assumptions, then repeated everything. Most employees never noticed. Porter had spent 13 years at Meridian Harbor. People were accustomed to seeing him at his desk. Quiet competence became invisible after enough years. One person noticed. Noah Bennett, 27 years old. Junior business analyst. Smart, curious, still young enough to ask questions. One Thursday night, Noah walked past Porter's desk at nearly 11. The office was empty. Rain tapped against the windows. Rows of monitors reflected across dark glass. Porter sat alone beneath a desk lamp. 3 screens displayed moving charts. Noah stopped. "You still here?" Porter glanced up. "For now." Noah laughed. "You know, most people went home 5 hours ago, right? Probably a healthy decision. What are you working on?" Porter hesitated, then rotated one monitor. Colored lines stretched across the display. Forecast curves, inventory movements, traffic flow models. Noah studied them. "What's that?" "A possibility." "That sounds mysterious." "It isn't. It looks complicated." Porter smiled faintly. "Complicated is usually just a lot of simple things hiding together." Noah looked at the screen for several more seconds, then shook his head. "I don't understand any of this." "That's okay. You think it'll work?" Porter returned his attention to the monitor. "I think it's getting closer." Noah left shortly afterward, but the image stayed with him. The quiet analyst everyone ignored, still working when the entire building was dark. Weeks passed. The project evolved. What began as a collection of spreadsheets slowly transformed into something larger. Porter called it root pulse, not because it sounded impressive, because it described exactly what it did. The system measured operational pulse, inventory pulse, transportation pulse, demand pulse. It connected departments that had never been analyzed together before. For the first time, North Star could see its entire network through one interface. Every bottleneck, every delay, every forecast risk, everything. Porter kept detailed records. Every version, every modification, every update. The habit came from his father. Years earlier, his father had owned a small construction company outside Tacoma. One lesson had been repeated endlessly. If something matters, document it. Memory changes. Records don't. Porter followed that advice without thinking. Each version of Root Pulse received timestamps. Notes, archived backups, saved exports. Everything organized, everything traceable. Not because he expected trouble, because that was simply how he worked. By early April, the first predictive model was ready. Porter ran a simulation, then another, then 20 more. The results remained consistent. His pulse quickened. Not dramatically, just enough. The system was predicting inventory congestion 7 days before it occurred. He checked the calculations again, then again. The numbers held. He pulled real-world operational data from North Star's Denver facility, compared forecasts against reality. The accuracy rate exceeded 92%. Porter leaned back in his chair. Outside, Seattle's skyline glowed beneath a cloudy evening sky. For the first time in months, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The model worked. Not perfectly. Nothing ever did. But it worked. The next morning, he prepared a preliminary demonstration package. Nothing flashy, no dramatic graphics, just evidence, charts, forecasts, operational savings estimates, the kind of information executives claimed they wanted. He uploaded the package into the North Star Project workspace. then sent a short update email. No celebration, no self-promotion, no attempt to attract attention. Just facts. At 10:17 a.m., the email was delivered. By noon, something unexpected happened. Derek Whitmore appeared at Porter's desk. The director rarely visited the analyst's section. People noticed immediately. Derek stood beside the workstation and smiled. A polished executive smile, the kind practiced in mirrors. "I've been hearing some interesting things about your work on North Star." Porter looked up. Derek's eyes settled on the dashboard displayed across the monitor. The colorful interface reflected faintly in the glass walls nearby. For several seconds, Derek said nothing. His smile widened slightly. Then he asked a question. A simple question. One that sounded harmless. One that would change everything. "Porter," he said, "how soon can you send me everything you've built so far?" Derek Whitmore did not ask twice. By the end of that afternoon, Porter had packaged the latest version of RootPulse and uploaded it into a secure review folder. Source files, forecasting models, presentation drafts, performance reports, implementation notes, everything. The request itself hadn't seemed unusual. Directors reviewed projects all the time, especially projects tied to major clients. Porter wasn't protective of credit, never had been. He cared about whether something worked, not whose name appeared beside it. So when Derek thanked him and said, "Excellent work, Porter, this could be a game changer," there was no reason to suspect anything, at least not yet. For the next week, life continued normally. Porter worked. North Star's numbers improved. The Denver facility showed measurable reductions in congestion. Forecast accuracy climbed higher. Inventory movement stabilized. For the first time in nearly 2 years, positive metrics began appearing inside executive reports. Something else began changing too. The weekly leadership meetings. Normally, Porter attended only when technical questions required answers. Most of the time, he sat quietly along the wall. Sometimes he wasn't invited at all. Now he noticed RootPulse appearing more frequently. The project had become a discussion point. Executives wanted updates. Clients wanted updates. Leadership wanted updates. That should have been encouraging. Instead, something felt slightly off. Nothing dramatic, just small details, tiny inconsistencies, the kind most people ignored. On Monday morning, Richard Sloan congratulated Derek during a meeting. "Looks like your North Star initiative is finally turning things around." Derek smiled. "Still early, but we're seeing positive indicators." Porter sat 3 chairs away. No correction followed. No mention of who built the system. No mention of RootPulse. No mention of the hundreds of hours invested. The meeting moved on. Porter barely reacted. He wasn't interested in public recognition. Still, he noticed. A week later, it happened again. Different meeting, different audience, same pattern. Executives discussed improvements. Derek answered questions. Derek received praise. Derek accepted credit. Porter remained invisible. At first he assumed it was temporary. Leadership often simplified communication. Not every contributor got named. That was reality. But the pattern continued. Again. And again. And again. By late April, something became impossible to ignore. Derek had started speaking about RootPulse as though he had designed it personally. Not directly. Not yet. The language remained careful, subtle, calculated. "My model suggests, my forecasting framework, the system we've been building," small changes, but meaningful ones. Porter heard them. Others heard them too. Most never questioned it. After all, Derek was the director. Porter was the analyst. People naturally assumed ideas flowed downward, not upward. One afternoon, Noah Bennett appeared beside Porter's desk, carrying a coffee. "You got a minute?" Porter nodded. Noah lowered his voice. "This might sound weird." "Usually means it will." Noah laughed. Then his expression became serious. "In yesterday's meeting, Derek showed your congestion forecast." Porter continued typing. "Okay." He presented it like it was his. Porter's fingers paused briefly above the keyboard. Only briefly. What exactly did he say? Noah thought for a moment. He called it his predictive model. Silence settled between them. Noah studied Porter's face, waiting for anger, waiting for frustration, waiting for something. Instead, Porter simply resumed typing. "Interesting. That's it. What else would you like me to say?" Noah blinked. "Aren't you mad?" Porter looked toward the monitors. The forecasting dashboard glowed softly beneath fluorescent lights. "Being mad doesn't create evidence." Noah frowned. "You think he's taking credit?" "I think people reveal themselves over time." "That sounds like a yes." Porter smiled slightly, then changed the subject. The conversation ended there. But Noah left with a strange feeling. Most people would have exploded. Most people would have confronted Derek immediately. Porter didn't. And somehow that felt more dangerous. The following week brought another surprise. North Star executives requested a comprehensive progress presentation. A major one. Senior leadership would attend. The client's executive team would attend. Millions of dollars depended on the outcome. Porter assumed he would help prepare the technical sections. Instead, Derek requested every file associated with the project. Again, this time including archived versions, historical reports, backup presentations, even draft diagrams. The request seemed excessive. Still, Porter complied. Years of habit prevented shortcuts. Everything was organized. Everything was documented. Everything had timestamps. Derek appeared increasingly interested, increasingly involved, increasingly visible. One Friday afternoon, Porter entered a conference room earlier than expected. The room was empty, or so he thought. Derek stood near the display screen. A presentation deck was open. Slide after slide filled the monitor. Porter recognized them immediately. His charts, his forecasting visuals, his inventory simulations, his formatting, even the color coding. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Derek closed the presentation a little too quickly. "Didn't see you there?" Porter nodded. "Looks like you're preparing for North Star." Derek smiled. "Big meeting." "It is. We need to make sure everything lands properly." Porter glanced toward the dark screen, then back at Derek. "Of course." Nothing else was said, but as Porter left the room, a quiet pressure settled in the back of his mind. Not fear. Not yet. Awareness. A growing awareness. The following Tuesday provided another piece of the puzzle. An email arrived from Executive Administration. Subject line, North Star Strategic Review. Porter opened it. His name wasn't listed among attendees. That was unusual. Every technical presentation required someone capable of answering operational questions, especially one involving root pulse. He checked the attendee list twice. No mistake. Derek would present. Several executives would attend. North Star leadership would attend. Porter would not. A few minutes later, another message appeared. From Derek. Short, professional, deliberate. "Porter, I think it's best if leadership handles this presentation. Focus on supporting materials and ongoing development. Thanks, Derek." Porter read it once, then again. No emotion crossed his face. He simply archived the email. A few desks away, Noah watched. "You got kicked off the presentation. Looks that way. What the hell? Porter shrugged. Noah stared. I seriously don't understand you. That's fair. No, really. How are you this calm? Porter leaned back slightly. The answer came from somewhere deeper than the project itself. Years of experience. Years of observation. Years of watching people make mistakes while believing they were winning. Because situations have momentum. Noah frowned. What does that mean? It means people eventually commit to the story they're telling. And once they do, changing the story becomes difficult. Noah looked more confused than before. Porter returned to work. The matter seemed finished, at least on the surface. Then, Wednesday morning arrived. Porter logged into the shared project drive. He opened the North Star folder, clicked through the latest presentation directory, and stopped. For several seconds, he simply stared at the screen. The original project name was gone. Root Pulse had disappeared. In its place sat a new folder, a new presentation, a new title. Whitmore Flow Intelligence Framework. Porter's eyes moved slowly across the screen. The files remained familiar. The structure remained familiar. The content almost certainly remained familiar. Only one thing had changed: the name. And suddenly, for the first time, the shape of the entire situation became visible. Not as suspicion, not as possibility, as certainty. Someone wasn't preparing to borrow credit. Someone was preparing to own it. Porter clicked the folder open, and what he saw inside made him reach for a notebook. Not to argue, not to complain, to start keeping score. Porter did not open the folder immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and looked through the office windows. Seattle was wrapped in gray clouds. Rain streaked the glass. Below, traffic crawled through downtown streets. Everything outside looked normal. Inside, the shared drive, it wasn't. After a few moments, Porter clicked the folder. Whitmore Flow Intelligence Framework. The title appeared across a polished presentation deck. 27 slides. Professional formatting. Executive branding. New cover page. New logo placement. New section headers. Porter moved through them one by one. Slide 3. His demand forecasting model. Slide 6. His warehouse congestion algorithm. Slide 11. His transportation synchronization chart. Slide 17. His inventory prediction dashboard. Nothing had been rebuilt. Nothing had been redesigned. Everything came from Root Pulse. The only thing missing was the original name and the original creator. Porter continued scrolling. His expression never changed. Years of consulting had trained him to separate emotion from observation. Observe first, react later, maybe never. By the time he reached the final slide, he had already noticed something important. Derek had been thorough, but not perfect. People rarely were. The presentation looked new. The underlying files were not. Porter right-clicked the first chart. Properties. Metadata. Creation date. March 18th. Author. Porter Gonzales. He checked another. Same result. Then another, and another. The original fingerprints remained buried beneath the surface. Most people never looked for them. Porter did. He opened a notebook. At the top of a fresh page he wrote evidence, then began documenting everything. Slide number, file source, creation date, modification history, embedded ownership records. Nothing dramatic, just facts. The kind facts that survived arguments. The kind facts that survived investigations. An hour later, Noah appeared carrying a coffee. One look at Porter's monitor and he froze. What is that? Porter rotated the screen slightly. Noah stared. His eyebrows rose immediately. No way. Porter said nothing. Noah stepped closer. No, That's literally your project. Parts of it. Parts of it? Noah pointed toward the screen. That's the dashboard you've been building for months. Porter nodded. Looks familiar. Familiar, Noah lowered his voice. Derek renamed the whole thing. Porter closed one window and opened another. Version history. Additional timestamps appeared. More records, more details. Noah watched him work. You aren't even surprised. I suspected something. And now I know. Noah looked ready to explode. Porter looked ready to organize a filing cabinet. The contrast was almost absurd. You need to tell someone. Eventually. Eventually. Porter checked another property window. Facts, first. You're killing me. Porter smiled slightly. I've heard that before. Noah shook his head and walked away. The younger analyst still couldn't understand him. Maybe nobody could. Because Porter wasn't thinking about Derek anymore. He was thinking about process. When a system failed, emotional reactions usually made things worse. Good analysts isolated causes, collected data, verified conclusions. Only then did they act. The principle worked just as well with people. By late afternoon, another email arrived. This one came directly from Derek. Porter. I finalized the presentation deck, no need for further edits. Leadership wants a streamlined executive discussion, so attendance will be limited. Appreciate all your support. Derek. Support. Interesting choice of word. Porter read the message twice, then archived it beside the others. Another record. Another timestamp. Another piece. The next morning brought an unexpected opportunity. Not because someone offered help, because someone made a mistake. Porter was reviewing warehouse data when a calendar notification appeared. At first he ignored it. Then he noticed the title. North Star Executive Strategic Review. His eyes narrowed slightly. That couldn't be right. He opened the invitation. Date, time, location. Everything matched the meeting Derek had excluded him from. Porter checked the attendee list. His name remained there. Some administrative assistant had apparently forgotten to remove him from an earlier version. The invitation was active. The meeting details were visible. The access credentials remained valid. Porter sat quietly for several seconds, then opened the conference information. Location: Four Seasons Hotel, Seattle. 31st floor, Executive Conference Center. Thursday, 9 a.m. The largest North Star review of the year. A meeting he supposedly wasn't attending. Across the office, Noah noticed something. You okay? Porter turned his monitor slightly. Noah read the invitation, then looked back. Then read it again. A grin slowly appeared. Oh. Porter remained silent. Oh, that's interesting. A little. You going? Porter closed the invitation. No answer came. Noah laughed. That's a yes. Porter returned to work. The rest of the day passed quietly. But something had shifted. For weeks events had felt uncertain. Now they felt directional, not resolved. Directional. That evening the office emptied early. Most employees headed home before 6. Porter remained. As usual. The building grew silent. Lights dimmed automatically. Cleaning crews moved through distant hallways. Porter sat alone reviewing file histories. The deeper he looked, the clearer the picture became. Dozens of edits, multiple file exports, renamed versions, deleted references, reformatted title pages. One discovery stood out. 42 separate slides had originally listed him as author, creator, or technical lead. Every single reference had been removed. Not hidden. Removed. That required effort. Intentional effort. Porter wrote another note. 42 slides modified. Deliberate authorship removal. He underlined the sentence once, then closed the notebook. At nearly 9 o'clock, he finally stood and gathered his belongings. Laptop, notebook, lunch container, the same routine, the same quiet exit. The elevator descended toward the lobby. Porter watched floor numbers pass. 14, 13, 12, 11. His reflection stared back from the polished metal doors. Most people in the company saw an ordinary analyst, a background figure, a support employee, someone useful but forgettable. That perception had protected him for years. People rarely hid their intentions from someone they underestimated. Outside, rain continued falling. Porter crossed the street toward the parking garage. His aging Toyota Camry sat exactly where it always did. Third level, Section C. He unlocked the door and placed the notebook on the passenger seat. The blue cover caught the glow of overhead lights. Inside were dates, records, observations, evidence. Not accusations. Evidence. There was a difference. A very important difference. Porter started the engine. As the windshield wipers pushed away rain, his phone vibrated. A new email. Sender, Executive Administration. Subject, Final Presentation Materials attached. Porter opened it at a red light. The attached file appeared instantly. Whitmore _flow _intelligence _final .pptx. The final version. The version scheduled for North Star executives. The version Derek believed would secure his reputation. Porter downloaded the attachment, then closed the phone. A few moments later, he continued driving through the rain-soaked streets of Seattle. Tomorrow, Derek Whitmore would stand in front of North Star leadership and present the project as his own. Tomorrow, dozens of executives would applaud. Tomorrow, a lie would become official. At least that was the plan. What Derek didn't know was that one seat inside that conference room might still belong to Porter Gonzales. And Porter had no intention of forgetting what he had seen. Thursday morning arrived under a blanket of cold Seattle rain. The Four Seasons Hotel overlooked Elliott Bay through walls of glass and steel. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Executives moved through the lobby carrying leather portfolios and coffee cups that cost more than most lunches. Porter arrived at 8:14 a.m. Not early. Not late. Exactly as he preferred. He wore the same dark gray suit he had owned for years. Nothing about him suggested he was connected to a $48 million client account. That had always been the irony. The people doing the most important work were often the easiest to overlook. Porter crossed the marble lobby and stepped into the elevator. 31st floor. The ride lasted less than a minute. When the doors opened, he immediately saw the registration desk outside the conference center. North Star branding covered digital displays. Meridian Harbor executives clustered in small groups. Conversations floated through the room. Revenue forecasts, implementation schedules, contract renewals. Nobody paid attention to Porter, exactly as expected. He approached the registration table. The young event coordinator smiled. "Good morning." "Morning." "Name?" "Porter Gonzales." She typed quickly, then nodded. "There you are." No hesitation, no questions, no problems. A printed badge slid across the table. Porter accepted it. The invitation still worked. Interesting. Inside the conference room, preparations were nearly complete. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the water. A massive LED screen dominated the front wall. Rows of tables formed a horseshoe shape around the presentation area. Coffee stations lined one side of the room. Senior executives occupied the best seats. Technical personnel sat farther back. Porter chose a chair near the rear corner, close enough to observe, far enough to disappear. The room gradually filled. At 8:52, Derek Whitmore arrived. His confidence was visible from across the room. Tailored navy suit, Perfectly arranged presentation materials, relaxed smile. He moved from table to table shaking hands, accepting congratulations before the meeting had even begun. Several Meridian executives stopped him. "Big day. Looks like you've got this account turned around." North Star seems impressed. Each compliment landed smoothly. Each compliment strengthened the story already forming around him. Derek accepted them all. Porter watched quietly. Nothing more, nothing less. At precisely 9 o'clock, the meeting began. North Star executives entered together. Among them was Emily Carter, Chief Operating Officer, 39, sharp-eyed, practical, known throughout the logistics industry for asking difficult questions. Porter recognized her immediately. He had seen her in dozens of virtual meetings over the previous months. This was the first time they had occupied the same room. Emily greeted several Meridian executives before taking her seat. Then her eyes briefly scanned the room. For an instant, they paused on Porter. Not recognition. Observation. Then the meeting continued. Richard Sloan opened with formal introductions. A brief overview followed. Revenue projections, partnership goals, implementation timelines, standard executive material. Eventually, Richard turned toward Derek. "The floor is yours." Derek stood. The room grew quiet. The first slide appeared. Whitmore Flow Intelligence Framework. A polished title, a polished lie. Porter felt no surprise, only confirmation. Derek began confidently. 3 months ago, I started evaluating the operational inefficiencies within North Star's distribution network. The sentence landed smoothly. No hesitation, no discomfort, no indication that someone else had spent months building the system. Porter's gaze remained fixed on the screen. Every chart felt familiar. Every diagram. Every forecast. Every projection. Years of experience had trained him to notice details. And details mattered, especially when someone else presented technical work. For the first 20 minutes, Derek performed well, at least to people unfamiliar with the underlying architecture. The presentation looked impressive, predicted savings, reduced congestion, improved routing efficiency, lower inventory costs. The numbers were real. The results were real. That was what made the situation dangerous. A good lie usually contained large pieces of truth. The first crack appeared on slide 12. Most people missed it. Porter didn't. Neither did Emily Carter. The slide displayed warehouse congestion forecasts for the Denver distribution hub. Derek explained the model confidently, but one statement was wrong. Subtly wrong. The kind of mistake only someone deeply familiar with the system would catch. "The forecast engine updates every 72 hours, Derek explained. Porter's eyes narrowed slightly. No, it didn't. The engine updated every 6 hours. That frequency was one of the system's core advantages. A 72-hour update cycle would have made the model dramatically less effective. The mistake passed unnoticed. For the moment. The presentation continued. Slide 14, slide 15, slide 16. More applause, more executive approval, more confidence. Then another error appeared. This one larger. A routing optimization chart. Derek described the algorithm as demand-driven. It wasn't. RootPulse balanced demand forecasting against warehouse processing capacity. That distinction mattered. A lot. Again, most attendees didn't notice. Emily did. Porter saw it immediately. Not because she reacted dramatically, because she stopped taking notes. People often revealed attention through silence. For nearly 30 seconds, Emily simply watched Derek. Studied him. Measured him. The presentation continued. The room remained supportive. But something had shifted. A tiny shift. Almost invisible. At 9:47 a.m., the question period began. This was usually the safest part of executive presentations. Prepared presenters expected predictable questions. Budget, timeline, deployment schedule, resource allocation. Derek handled those comfortably. Then Emily Carter raised her hand. The room quieted. Several Meridian executives straightened in their chairs. Emily rarely asked easy questions. "Derek?" "Yes." She glanced toward the screen, then at her notes, then back at him. "Your congestion prediction engine interests me." Derek smiled. "Thank you." Emily nodded. "I'd like clarification." The room became still. Porter recognized the look on her face. She wasn't seeking confirmation. She was testing understanding. Big difference. Emily continued. "Last month, the Denver hub experienced a sudden inventory surge from 3 separate retail clients." Derek nodded. "Correct. Your system predicted that surge 7 days in advance." "That's right." Emily folded her hands, then asked the question. A highly specific question, the kind only the creator of the model would answer easily. What weighting factor does the forecasting engine assign when warehouse processing velocity conflicts with transportation demand projections? Silence followed. Not dramatic silence. Professional silence. The kind that settles over a room when people expect expertise. Porter immediately knew the answer. Because he had written the formula. Because he had tested it. Because he had rebuilt it 6 different times before finding the correct balance. Across the room, Derek froze. Not visibly, not enough for casual observers, but enough. A fraction of a second. Then another, then another. His confident smile weakened slightly. Porter watched. Emily watched. Everyone waited. Derek finally spoke. "Well, the weighting varies depending on operational conditions." A vague answer. Too vague. Emily nodded slowly. "Of course." She waited. Derek continued. "But generally speaking, it's dynamic." Another vague answer. Another problem. Emily glanced toward the screen again, then back toward Derek. Her expression remained neutral, professional, calm, which somehow made everything worse, because she wasn't helping him. She was giving him chances, and he wasn't taking them. Another silence settled across the room. Longer this time. Then, something unexpected happened. Emily's gaze drifted toward the back corner of the conference room, toward Porter. The movement was subtle, but deliberate. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Emily looked back toward Derek. One final opportunity. "Can you be more specific?" Derek opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Porter could almost see the calculations happening behind his eyes. Searching, guessing, trying to find solid ground. None appeared. The room felt different now, sharper, more alert. People sensed uncertainty, even if they didn't yet understand why. Then Emily turned fully toward the back of the room. Her eyes settled on Porter, and for the first time that morning, every head in the conference room followed her gaze. "Mr. Gonzales," she said calmly, "do you happen to know the answer?" For a brief moment, nobody moved. The conference room seemed to hold its breath. Executives turned toward the back corner where Porter Gonzales sat quietly beside a cup of untouched coffee. The question hung in the air. "Mr. Gonzales, do you happen to know the answer?" Porter looked at Emily Carter. Not Derek, not Richard Sloan, not anyone else. Only Emily. The question itself wasn't difficult. The challenge was everything surrounding it. Because everyone in the room understood something now. Maybe not the whole story, but enough to sense tension, enough to recognize uncertainty. Porter placed his pen on the table, then stood. His chair rolled backward slightly across the carpet. "I do." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The room had already become silent. Porter stepped closer to the screen. The congestion forecast slide remained displayed behind Derek. Rows of numbers glowed against a dark background. Emily nodded. "Please." Porter glanced briefly at the chart, not because he needed to, more from habit than necessity. "The weighting factor isn't fixed." Several executives exchanged looks. Derek remained motionless. Porter continued. "It begins at 40% transportation demand and 60% warehouse processing velocity." Emily listened carefully. "So warehouse capacity receives greater influence?" "Initially, yes." Porter pointed toward the Denver forecast. "But once processing efficiency falls below 82% utilization, the model automatically increases warehouse weighting to 75%. Emily nodded. "To prevent transportation forecasts from masking operational bottlenecks." "Correct." A few North Star executives suddenly began writing notes. The answer wasn't just accurate. It was precise, specific, detailed, the kind of answer that usually came from someone deeply familiar with the system. Porter continued. "The adjustment occurs every 6 hours using updated throughput data." Emily's eyebrow lifted slightly. "Every 6 hours?" "Yes." She looked toward Derek, then back toward Porter. "Interesting. Because 20 minutes earlier, Derek had told the room the system updated every 72 hours. The discrepancy landed heavily. Nobody commented. Nobody needed to. Everyone heard it. Everyone understood. Porter finished speaking and stepped back. The room remained quiet for several seconds. Then Emily smiled. Not broadly, not dramatically, just enough. "Thank you, Mr. Gonzales." Porter nodded. "Of course." He returned to his seat. The atmosphere had changed. Not completely, but noticeably. Questions continued. The presentation moved forward, yet something invisible now occupied the room. Doubt. Small. Persistent. Growing. Derek recovered quickly. Years of executive experience helped him navigate uncomfortable moments. He redirected attention toward implementation schedules, cost reductions, projected savings, topics that required less technical depth. The meeting eventually concluded. Applause followed. Polite, professional. Not quite as enthusiastic as before. People gathered their materials. Conversations restarted. Groups formed around coffee stations and networking tables. Porter remained seated, watching, observing, collecting information. Across the room, Emily spoke quietly with several North Star executives. Meanwhile, Richard Sloan approached Derek. Their conversation remained private. Still, Porter noticed something. Richard appeared thoughtful. Not concerned. Not yet. Thoughtful. A small but important distinction. After several minutes, Porter collected his notebook and prepared to leave. The formal session was over. His purpose there had been fulfilled. At least he thought so. As he crossed the conference room, a voice stopped him. "Mr. Gonzales." Porter turned. Emily Carter stood nearby, close enough that nobody else could easily hear. Her expression remained calm, professional, sharp. The reputation she carried throughout the industry suddenly made perfect sense. She noticed everything. "Good presentation," she said. Porter almost smiled. "I wasn't presenting." Emily glanced briefly toward Derek, then back. "Interesting observation." Porter said nothing. Emily studied him for a moment, long enough to suggest she was evaluating more than his answer. "How long have you worked on this project?" A simple question, yet the wording mattered. Not assisted, not supported. Worked on. Porter understood the difference. "Since February." Emily nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." Again, silence. Again, observation. Then she extended her hand. "Thank you for your contribution." Contribution. Another carefully chosen word. Porter shook her hand. "You're welcome." Emily departed. The conversation lasted less than 60 seconds, yet somehow felt more significant than most meetings Porter had attended all year, because she wasn't guessing anymore. She was confirming. Outside the conference room, elevators carried attendees toward the lobby. Derek caught up with Porter near the hallway. The smile was gone. Not entirely, but enough. "Can we talk?" Porter stopped. "Sure." Derek glanced around, making certain nobody stood nearby, then lowered his voice. "What happened in there?" Porter considered the question. "I'm not sure what you mean." Derek's jaw tightened. "The question from Emily. She asked me something. You didn't have to answer." Porter looked at him. The statement lingered between them. Interesting. Not because of what Derek said, because of what he didn't say. He didn't claim the answer was wrong. He didn't challenge the explanation. He didn't argue the facts. Only the fact that Porter had spoken. Eventually, Porter replied. She asked a direct question. "You could have deferred." "I suppose." Derek folded his arms. "You embarrassed me." The word sounded strange, even to Porter. Embarrassed. Not because of hostility, because the embarrassment hadn't been created by Porter. It had existed before the question was asked. The question simply exposed it. Porter remained calm. "I answered accurately." Derek stared at him. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Derek stepped closer. Not aggressively, but deliberately. "The executive team expects a unified message." Porter nodded. "I understand." "Good." Derek relaxed slightly. "Then remember the chain of command." There it was, the real concern. Not technical accuracy, not client outcomes. Control, perception, authority. Porter watched him carefully. Years earlier he might have argued, might have challenged him, might have demanded recognition. Now he simply observed. Because Derek kept revealing things, and every revelation mattered. "I'll keep that in mind." The answer sounded respectful, which made it impossible to attack. Derek seemed dissatisfied anyway. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the elevators. Porter remained where he was. The hallway gradually emptied. Within minutes, only hotel staff remained. He finally left the building shortly before noon. Seattle's rain had stopped. Gray clouds still hung overhead. Traffic moved steadily along the waterfront. Porter drove back toward Meridian Harbor. The office felt unusually quiet that afternoon. Most executives remained occupied with follow-up meetings. Employees worked normally. Phones rang. Keyboards clicked. Business continued. Yet something subtle had shifted. Noah appeared at Porter's desk less than 10 minutes after he arrived. His face already carried questions. "A coworker texted me." Porter looked up. "That's dangerous." "I'm serious." "What happened?" Noah pulled up a chair. "Apparently Derek got hammered in the Q&A. Hammered seems dramatic. Fine. Lightly tapped with a professional hammer." Porter laughed. Rare, but genuine. Noah leaned forward. "Emily Carter asked about weighting factors." Porter raised an eyebrow. "News travels fast. That's not the point." Noah lowered his voice. "People are talking." "About what?" "You." Porter returned his attention to the monitor. "People should find a hobby." "I'm serious." "I know." Noah watched him for several seconds, still trying to understand how someone could remain so calm. Then his computer chimed. An incoming email notification. Porter's screen lit up almost simultaneously. Both men glanced toward it. Sender, Emily Carter. North Star Freight Systems. Porter's expression didn't change, but something inside him sharpened immediately. Emily rarely sent unnecessary messages. He opened the email. A short note appeared. Professional. Simple. No greeting beyond his name. No unnecessary language. Just a few carefully written sentences. And an attachment. A very interesting attachment. Porter stared at the file name. Noah leaned closer. "What is it?" Porter didn't answer immediately, because the attachment name alone told him this wasn't a routine email. Not even close. It was the final presentation deck Derek had shown that morning, and Emily Carter had sent it directly to him. Porter stared at the email for several seconds before opening it. Not because he was surprised, because he was careful. Careful people survived situations that emotional people often made worse. The subject line was simple. Presentation materials. Nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious. Exactly the kind of email most employees would skim without thinking. Emily Carter's message contained only 3 sentences. Porter read them twice. "Mr. Gonzales, thank you for your contribution today. I thought you might appreciate having a copy of the materials discussed during the meeting. Also, the architecture behind the model was impressive. Regards, Emily Carter." That final sentence caught his attention immediately. The architecture behind the model. Not presentation. Not implementation. Architecture. A very specific word. The kind of word technical people used when they understood how something had actually been built. Across the desk, Noah was still waiting. "What does it say?" Porter rotated the monitor slightly. Noah read the email, then read it again. His eyes widened. "Wait." Porter remained silent. "No. Hold on." Noah pointed toward the screen. "She knows." "Possibly." "Possibly." Noah almost laughed. "She absolutely knows." Porter wasn't interested in assumptions, only evidence. So instead of responding, he downloaded the attachment. The presentation file appeared on his desktop. Whitmore_flow_final.pptx. The same file Derek had presented that morning. The same file that now officially represented months of work. Porter opened it. The familiar title slide appeared. Then the second, then the third. Nothing looked different. At least not initially. Noah watched from nearby. "What are you looking for?" "Details." "What kind of details?" "The kind people forget." Porter clicked File. Properties. Advanced Information. The metadata panel opened. Immediately several entries appeared. Creation date. Original file path. Version history. Embedded comments. Noah leaned closer. The room around them faded into background noise. Telephones rang. Employees talked. Meetings continued. Neither man noticed. The metadata told a story. A very interesting story. Original creator, Porter Gonzales. Original save location, PGONZALES_ROUTEPULSE_DEV. First draft, date, March 18th. Porter wrote the information into his notebook. Carefully, methodically. Noah stared. "Oh my God." Porter continued writing. Another property field appeared. Previous version reference, additional timestamps, additional file ownership data. The information wasn't hidden particularly well because most people never expected someone to check. People focused on appearance. Facts usually lived beneath appearance. Porter preferred facts. He opened another section. Comments. A list appeared. Dozens of internal editing notes. Many had been removed from the visible slides. The underlying file still retained fragments. One comment immediately stood out. Porter, can we simplify this forecast explanation before client review? Author Derek Whitmore. Date April 9th. Another. Excellent model. This could save the account. Author Derek Whitmore. Date April 11th. Another. Need Porter to walk me through waiting logic. Author Derek Whitmore. Date April 14th. Noah slowly sat down. The excitement had disappeared from his face. Something else replaced it. Disbelief. He actually left all this in there. Porter nodded. Looks that way. I don't understand. Most people stop looking once they're convinced they've won. Noah stared at him, then back at the screen. The evidence continued appearing. Every few minutes another piece surfaced. Old file paths, revision histories, embedded object ownership, comments connected to Porter's workstation, backup references, archived author records. Nothing dramatic individually. Together, they formed a timeline. And timelines mattered, especially when facts became disputed. Porter spent the next 2 hours reviewing every element of the presentation, not rushing, not skipping steps. By late afternoon, he had identified enough supporting evidence to fill dozens of notebook pages. The picture had become remarkably clear. Derek hadn't recreated anything. He hadn't independently developed anything. He hadn't even substantially modified the system. He had renamed it, reformatted it, rebranded it, then presented it as his own. That distinction would matter later, a lot. At 5 o'clock, most employees began heading home. Porter stayed, as usual. The office gradually emptied. The hum of conversation faded. Cleaning crews began appearing. Outside the windows, Seattle's skyline reflected across Puget Sound beneath a pale evening sky. Porter remained focused. One question occupied his mind. Not whether Derek had taken credit. That part was obvious now. The question was whether he could prove it in a way nobody could dismiss. There was a difference. A very important difference. Anyone could make accusations. Evidence carried weight. Accusations created arguments. Evidence created conclusions. Around 6:30 p.m., another discovery appeared. This one surprised even Porter. He opened an embedded chart object hidden inside Slide 19. Most users never interacted directly with embedded elements. Porter did. A separate source file opened automatically. The file name immediately caught his attention. rootpulse _ final _ architecture _ master .xlsx, not Whitmore Flow Intelligence. rootpulse, the original name, the original file, the original creator. Even better, the spreadsheet contained revision records dating back months. Dozens of them. Each tied directly to Porter's employee credentials. Each time-stamped. Each independently verifiable. Noah had stayed late, partly because of curiosity, partly because he sensed something significant was happening. When Porter showed him the spreadsheet, Noah laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. This is insane. Porter nodded. Interesting. No, not interesting. Noah pointed toward the screen. This is proof. Porter didn't respond immediately. Instead, he copied the file path into his notes, then archived the document. Only afterward did he answer. It's part of proof. Noah shook his head. You think like a lawyer. No, you do. Porter smiled faintly. I think like someone who doesn't want surprises. The younger analyst sat quietly for a moment, then asked something that had been bothering him for weeks. Why haven't you confronted him? Porter looked through the office windows. The city lights were beginning to appear. Traffic flowed below. People hurried home. Most would never know anything about rootpulse, or Derek, or North Star. Life would continue regardless. Eventually he answered, "Because confrontation gives people time." Noah frowned. Time for what? To prepare. The answer lingered. Then Porter continued, "When someone doesn't know what evidence exists, they tend to reveal more." Noah nodded slowly. The idea seemed to settle into place. Not revenge, not passivity. Patience. Different thing entirely. Around 8 p.m., Porter finally finished. He gathered every relevant record, printed supporting documents, exported metadata, archived copies, version histories, email chains, comments, file ownership records, everything. The printer worked steadily for nearly 20 minutes. Pages accumulated in organized stacks, one after another. By the time it finished, the pile measured nearly 2 inches thick. Porter arranged everything chronologically. Evidence became stronger when it told a story. Stories mattered, especially true stories. The final page emerged from the printer. Porter collected it and placed it on top, then reached into a desk drawer. Inside sat a blue presentation folder. Plain, professional, unremarkable. He opened it carefully, placed the documents inside, closed it. Noah watched. "What are you going to do now?" Porter considered the question. The answer was simple, but timing mattered. "Keep gathering facts. You already have enough." "Maybe." "Seriously, Porter." Noah gestured toward the folder. "That thing could end somebody's career." Porter looked at the blue cover. Maybe, maybe not. That wasn't the objective. The objective was truth. Consequences belonged to other people. Eventually he stood. The office around them was almost empty now. Only a handful of lights remained illuminated. Porter picked up a black marker, then wrote 2 words across the front of the folder. North Star. Nothing else. No accusations, no conclusions. Just a name. A place where facts would live until the right moment arrived. He placed the folder into his briefcase, locked it, then turned off his monitor. As the screen went dark, one final thought settled into place. The situation had changed. Not because he was angry, not because he wanted revenge, because for the first time he possessed something stronger than suspicion. He possessed a complete trail. And somewhere inside Meridian Harbor, consulting people were about to discover that a quiet man who documented everything was a very difficult person to deceive. The following Monday began quietly. Porter preferred it that way. No dramatic confrontations, no emotional meetings, no hallway arguments, just preparation. At 7:12 a.m., he parked his aging Camry in the same spot he used every morning. 3rd level, Section C. The blue North Star folder rested on the passenger seat. Thick, organized, waiting. Porter carried it into Meridian Harbor Consulting and headed directly to his office. Outside employees were just beginning to arrive. Coffee cups, laptop bags, morning conversations. Nobody knew what sat inside that folder. Nobody knew what had been assembled over the previous week. And Porter intended to keep it that way for a little longer. The first hour of his morning was spent doing something that surprised even Noah. He wasn't gathering evidence against Derek. He was researching company policy, specifically Meridian Harbor's intellectual property standards, authorship rules, project attribution procedures, ethics, compliance requirements, reporting channels. Most employees never read those documents. Porter read every page. Twice. Facts mattered. But context mattered too. If he eventually presented evidence, it needed to connect directly to policy violations, not opinions, not personal grievances. Violations. By mid-morning, his notebook contained another 6 pages of observations. Several policies stood out. One required accurate representation of authorship in client-facing materials. Another prohibited knowingly claiming ownership of work created by another employee. A third addressed professional misrepresentation during external presentations. Porter highlighted each section, then printed copies. The blue folder grew thicker. Around noon, Noah appeared carrying 2 coffees. He placed one beside Porter. "Peace offering?" Porter looked up. "For what?" "For being annoying." "You'll need something stronger than coffee." Noah laughed and sat down. Then his eyes drifted toward the blue folder. "You're still building the case. Building understanding." "That's not what lawyers call it." Porter smiled. "I'm not a lawyer." "No, but Janice Hollowell is." The name caught Porter's attention. Janice Hollowell, Chief Compliance Officer, one of the most respected executives in the company. Known for 2 things, precision and independence. She didn't care about rank, she didn't care about politics, she cared about documentation. Noah lowered his voice. "If anybody ever looked at that folder, she'd be the one." Porter nodded slightly. The thought had already crossed his mind. Several times. The conversation ended there, but Noah's observation lingered. Because he was right. If facts were eventually presented, Janice would be involved. The question wasn't who. The question was when. That afternoon brought another unexpected development. Not from Porter, not from Derek, from North Star. A status meeting invitation arrived. Nothing unusual there. What was unusual was the attendee list. Emily Carter had specifically requested Porter's presence. Directly. By name. The message was brief. Porter Gonzales requested for technical continuity. Porter read the line twice, then archived the email. Another document. Another timestamp. Another record. Across the office, Derek noticed it too. Porter knew because Derek appeared at his desk less than 30 minutes later. The director's smile looked practiced. Too practiced. "I saw the North Star meeting invite." Porter nodded. "So did I." Derek folded his arms. "Emily wants more technical participation moving forward." "Looks that way?" Derek remained silent for a moment, studying him, evaluating him, trying to measure something. Finally, he spoke. "I assume we're aligned on messaging." Porter looked up from his monitor. "What messaging?" "The project." Porter's expression remained neutral. "The project exists." Derek's jaw tightened slightly. For an instant, frustration appeared, then disappeared. "We need consistency." Porter nodded. "Consistency is useful." Again, not an argument, not resistance, not agreement either. Derek left dissatisfied, which told Porter something important. People usually became nervous when control started slipping. By Wednesday evening, Porter had expanded the North Star folder substantially. The evidence now fell into 5 categories: project creation records, version histories, metadata, email communications, policy references, everything cross-referenced, everything indexed, everything easy to verify. Noah stared at the organizational system with admiration. "You know this is terrifying, right?" Porter looked up. "What is this?" Noah pointed toward the folder. "Most people would have screamed at Derek 3 weeks ago." "Probably. You built a database." Porter considered that. Not entirely inaccurate. A small smile appeared. Thursday morning brought the final piece, the one Porter hadn't expected, the one that transformed strong evidence into overwhelming evidence. It arrived through Noah. The younger analyst appeared at his desk before 9. His expression looked different, more serious than usual. He carried a yellow legal pad. "Got a minute?" Porter noticed the tone immediately. "Sure." Noah sat down, then lowered his voice. "I found something." Porter waited. Noah opened the pad. Several pages of meeting notes appeared, handwritten, dated, organized. I take notes during almost every leadership meeting. Porter nodded. I know. You remember that review session in April? Porter thought briefly. There were several. The one where Derek first saw a root pulse. Recognition appeared immediately. Yes. Noah slid the notebook forward. Raid page 4. Porter scanned the notes. Halfway down the page, a sentence appeared. Written weeks before the controversy escalated. Direct quotation. Speaker, Derek Whitmore. The words were unmistakable. Porter's model may be the breakthrough we've been looking for. Porter read the line twice, then continued. Additional notes followed. Discussion about root pulse, questions directed toward Porter, references to Porter as lead architect, references made in front of witnesses, before the project had been renamed, before authorship had been altered, before the presentation. Noah watched quietly. I thought you should have it. Porter closed the notebook. This was significant, not because it proved authorship. The metadata already did that. It proved something else. Knowledge. Derek had known exactly who created the project, from the beginning. A crucial distinction. Intent often mattered more than action. Noah leaned back. Will it help? Porter nodded. Yes. Good. The younger analyst hesitated, then asked the question he'd been carrying for days. So, what's next? Porter looked toward the windows. Rain moved across Seattle's skyline. Gray clouds drifted above the city. Traffic flowed below. Life continued. The answer came easily, because he'd already made the decision. Compliance. Noah sat upright. You mean now? Soon. No more waiting. Enough waiting. The statement settled between them. Not dramatic, not emotional, just final. That afternoon, Porter reviewed the folder one final time. Every document, every email, every note, every policy reference, everything. Then he prepared a summary timeline. February, project assignment. March, route pulse development. April, authorship acknowledgments. May, presentation rebranding. June, client presentation. The story became impossible to misunderstand. Simple, clear, documented. At 4:17 p.m., Porter opened Outlook, created a new calendar invitation. Recipient Janice Hollowell, Chief Compliance Officer. Subject: Request for confidential review of project attribution documentation. He attached nothing. Not yet. Only a short note. Professional. Direct. The kind of message impossible to misinterpret. Then he pressed send. The email disappeared. A small action. A quiet action. Yet somehow it felt larger than everything that had happened so far. Because evidence only mattered when someone willing to examine it existed. Less than 10 minutes later, a response arrived. Janice Hollowell. Brief. Professional. Direct. Exactly as expected. Mr. Gonzales, I have reviewed your request. Please bring all supporting documentation, Conference Room C, Friday, 9 a.m., Janice Hollowell. Porter read the message once, then closed it. Across his desk sat the blue North Star folder. Months of work, weeks of evidence gathering, hundreds of documents. Now it finally had a destination. And somewhere else in the building, Derek Whitmore still believed the presentation had ended the story. He had no idea the real meeting hadn't happened yet. It was scheduled for Friday morning, behind a closed door, with someone whose job was determining exactly how much could be proven. Friday morning arrived clear and cold. The rain that usually hung over Seattle had disappeared overnight. Sunlight reflected from the glass towers surrounding Meridian Harbor Consulting. Porter arrived 20 minutes early. Not because he was nervous, because he respected preparation. The blue North Star folder rested beneath his arm as he crossed the 14th floor. Employees moved through their normal routines. Coffee, emails, meetings. Nobody paid much attention. That was fine. Most important events never looked important from the outside. Conference Room C sat near the compliance offices on the 17th floor. No windows, no executive branding. No polished presentation screens, just a rectangular table, neutral walls, professional silence, the kind of room built for facts. Porter entered at 8:42. Janice Hollowell was already there. That surprised him, not because executives were often late, because Janice's reputation suggested precision. The reputation appeared accurate. She sat reviewing documents when he entered. 51 years old, silver-rimmed glasses, dark suit, calm expression, nothing flashy, nothing intimidating. Yet somehow the room felt serious the moment she looked up. "Mr. Gonzales." "Miss Hollowell." She gestured toward a chair. "Please." Porter sat. The blue folder remained closed in front of him. Janice folded her hands. No small talk, no introductions, no unnecessary conversation. "I reviewed your request." Porter nodded. "You stated concerns regarding project attribution." "Correct." Janice studied him carefully, not emotionally, analytically, as though she were evaluating data rather than a person. That suited Porter perfectly. Finally, she asked the question. A simple one. The same question that mattered more than anything else. "How much of this can you prove?" Silence settled across the room. Porter opened the folder. The sound seemed unusually loud. Inside sat months of work, evidence, documentation, timelines. He placed the first document on the table. Project assignment. Date. February 12th. North Star Recovery Initiative. Assigned lead analyst Porter Gonzales. Janice reviewed it, made a note, then looked up. "Continue." Porter did. The next 90 minutes unfolded methodically. No speeches, no accusations, no emotional appeals. Just facts. Project development records, version histories, email chains, archived presentations, metadata, meeting notes, policy references, each document connected to another. Each piece strengthened the next. Janice interrupted only occasionally. To clarify, to verify, to ask questions. Questions Porter answered directly. Nothing more, nothing less. By 9:37, the stack of reviewed documents had grown substantially. Janice picked up one of the printed metadata reports. Original creator Porter Gonzales. She examined it carefully. Was this information modified after the fact? No. Can that be independently verified? Yes. She made another note, then moved to the next document. The meeting notes Noah had provided. The quote from Derek. "Porter's model may be the breakthrough we've been looking for." Janice read it twice, then looked up. "Who recorded this?" "Noah Bennett." "Would he confirm its accuracy?" "I believe so." Janice nodded. Another note, another connection, another piece. The process continued. Slowly, carefully. By 10:05 they reached the client presentation, the renamed project, Whitmore Flow Intelligence Framework. Porter placed the slide comparison documents on the table. Side-by-side versions, original root pulse materials, modified presentation materials, identical content, different attribution. Janice spent several minutes reviewing them. When she finally spoke, her voice remained completely neutral. 42 references removed. Correct? Deliberately. Correct. The room became quiet again. Porter noticed something. Janice wasn't challenging the evidence anymore. She was organizing it. An important distinction. People challenged evidence when they doubted it. They organized evidence when they accepted it. At 10:17, she closed the folder, then leaned back slightly. For the first time, her attention shifted away from documents, toward implications. "Did you discuss these concerns directly with Mr. Whitmore?" Porter answered honestly. "No." "Why not?" A reasonable question. One many people would ask. Porter thought briefly, then answered. "Because I preferred documentation before confrontation." Janice's expression didn't change, but something about her posture suggested approval. Very slight, almost invisible, still there. The compliance officer remained silent for several seconds, then opened a separate notebook. A fresh page. New heading. Internal review. That was the moment Porter realized something important. The issue had officially moved beyond him, beyond Derek, beyond a workplace disagreement. It had become an investigation. Janice looked up. "Mr. Gonzales?" "Yes. I appreciate the organization of this material." "Thank you." "Most employees arrive with opinions." Porter waited. "You arrived with evidence." The statement carried weight. Not praise, recognition. Different thing. Then Janice asked another question. One Porter had anticipated. "What outcome are you seeking?" Interesting. Very interesting, because the answer would reveal motive. Many people in his position would demand punishment, termination, public accountability, revenge. Porter had spent considerable time thinking about that question. His answer came immediately. Accurate attribution. Janice watched him carefully. "That's all. That's enough." Silence followed, long enough to confirm she believed him. Finally, she nodded. "Understood." At 10:41, the meeting concluded. Or so Porter thought. Instead, Janice stood, collected several documents, then spoke again. "Please remain available." Porter looked up. "Of course. I may have additional questions." "Understood." Janice closed the folder, then added something unexpected. "Mr. Whitmore will be interviewed today." No emotion crossed Porter's face, but internally the significance registered immediately. Today. Not next week, not next month. Today. The investigation was moving faster than he anticipated. He stood, gathered his belongings, then left conference room C. The hallway outside felt strangely quiet, not because anything had changed physically, because the situation itself had changed. The evidence no longer belonged solely to him. It now belonged to compliance. And compliance had rules. The rest of the morning passed slowly. Porter returned to his desk, opened his email, reviewed reports, worked normally, or as normally as possible. Noah appeared before lunch. The younger analyst looked nervous. "Well," Porter glanced up. "It went well." "That's it?" "That's it." Noah groaned. "You are impossible." Porter smiled. No argument. Around 1:30 p.m., an unusual calendar notification appeared across the office. Leadership meeting. Executive conference room. Mandatory attendance, Derek Whitmore. Human resources. Compliance. Richard Sloan. Several employees noticed. Office rumors spread quickly. Nobody understood the reason. Speculation filled hallways. Budget issues. Client concerns. Contract negotiations. Nobody guessed correctly. Porter ignored all of it. At 2:04 p.m., he happened to glance toward the executive corridor. The conference room doors remained closed. People entered. Nobody exited. Minutes stretched into hours. The atmosphere inside the office slowly changed. Subtle, unspoken. Employees sensed something happening, the way people sensed storms before seeing clouds. At 3:47 p.m., the doors finally opened. Several executives emerged. Human resources. Compliance staff. Richard Sloan. Nobody looked pleased. Then Derek Whitmore stepped into the hallway. Porter saw him through the glass. Only briefly, but long enough. The difference was obvious. Gone was the polished confidence. Gone was the executive smile. Gone was the relaxed certainty that had carried him through months of presentations and meetings. His face looked pale, not frightened, not defeated, just shocked, as though reality had suddenly become much heavier than expected. Derek glanced across the office floor. For one moment his eyes met Porter's. Neither man spoke, neither moved. Then Derek looked away first. A small thing, yet somehow significant. He walked quickly toward the elevators. The doors closed behind him. Silence followed. Noah appeared beside Porter's desk almost immediately. "Was that just me?" Porter kept working. "What?" Derek looked like he'd seen a ghost. Porter focused on his monitor. Rows of logistics data filled the screen. The same work he'd always done. The same work that had started everything. Finally, he answered. Maybe he saw evidence. Noah stared, then laughed despite himself. Because for the first time since the North Star situation began, it felt like momentum had changed directions. And somewhere upstairs, people were still reviewing facts that Derek Whitmore probably wished had never been documented. Monday morning brought something Porter had not expected. Silence. Not office silence. Not the ordinary quiet that settled between meetings. A different kind. The silence that followed a disruption nobody fully understood yet. Employees still worked. Phones still rang. Project deadlines still existed. Yet conversations stopped whenever Derek Whitmore's name appeared. Rumors had spread throughout Meridian Harbor over the weekend. Not details, just fragments. Compliance review, executive investigation, North Star concerns. Nobody knew the full story. Porter preferred it that way. At 8:03 a.m., he settled into his desk and opened Root Pulse. The original version. The real version. While other people focused on politics, he focused on work. North Star still needed help. Warehouses still moved inventory. Forecasts still required maintenance. Reality rarely paused for office drama. Halfway through the morning, an email notification appeared. Sender, Emily Carter, North Star Freight Systems. Porter opened it immediately. The message contained only one paragraph. Direct, professional. Very Emily Carter. Porter. For upcoming implementation planning sessions, North Star would like you included as the primary technical contact. Please coordinate directly with our operations team moving forward. Regards, Emily. Porter read it twice. Not because the message was unclear, because of what it represented. Primary technical contact. Those 4 words carried consequences, large ones. Until now, Derek had controlled communication between Meridian Harbor and North Star. Now the client was requesting direct access, specifically to Porter. Noah noticed the email almost immediately. His timing remained impressive. Tell me that's what I think it is. Porter rotated the monitor. Noah read, then sat down, slowly. Oh. Interesting. Interesting. Noah laughed. This is a disaster. For who? You know exactly who. Porter returned to work. Noah remained staring at the screen. The younger analyst had become unusually invested in the situation. Perhaps because he had watched it unfold from the beginning. Perhaps because unfairness irritated him. Either way, his reaction was predictable. Porter's wasn't. Because Porter wasn't thinking about Derek. He was thinking about North Star. If the client wanted direct technical communication, implementation would move faster. That mattered more. Around 10 o'clock, another email arrived. This one from Richard Sloan. The CEO rarely contacted Porter directly. In 13 years at Meridian Harbor, it had happened only a handful of times. The subject line was brief. Meeting request. Richard wanted 30 minutes. Wednesday afternoon. Executive conference room. No agenda provided. Porter accepted immediately. Across the office, Derek's former executive assistant spent most of the morning moving files, removing access permissions, updating organizational charts. Small changes. Interesting changes. Nobody explained them. Nobody needed to. People noticed. By lunchtime, one thing had become obvious. Derek was no longer leading the North Star account, officially or unofficially. The absence itself told the story. At 1:15 p.m., Porter joined a video conference with North Star's operations leadership. Emily attended. So did 3 regional directors, 2 logistics managers, and several technical specialists. Something became apparent within the first 5 minutes. Nobody asked for Derek. Nobody mentioned Derek. The conversation focused entirely on implementation, warehouses, forecasting, inventory flow, real work. Emily opened the meeting. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Porter for joining us directly. Porter nodded. Happy to help? Emily continued. We'd like to accelerate deployment across additional facilities. A map appeared on screen. 12 locations, several states, a much larger rollout than originally planned. One operations director leaned forward. We've been reviewing the model results from Denver. Porter listened. The director continued. The savings exceeded expectations. Another executive joined. We believe the framework can be scaled nationally. Porter remained careful. We'll need validation before full deployment. Emily smiled slightly. Exactly the answer she expected. Not salesmanship. Analysis. 1 hour later, the meeting concluded. The outcome was significant. North Star intended to expand the project. Millions of dollars in additional consulting revenue were potentially involved. More importantly, the client now viewed Porter as the primary technical authority. Word traveled quickly. By late afternoon, several Meridian executives had learned about the meeting. Interest increased. Questions increased. Visibility increased. The same people who had ignored Porter for years suddenly wanted updates. Funny how success changed perception. Wednesday arrived. The meeting with Richard Sloan approached. Porter arrived 5 minutes early. As usual. The executive conference room occupied a corner of the top floor. Large windows, city views, expensive furniture. Everything executives seemed to enjoy. Richard stood near the windows when Porter entered. The CEO looked older than usual. Tired. Not physically. Professionally. Leadership carried weight, especially when mistakes surfaced. Porter. Richard. The CEO gestured toward a chair. Porter sat. For a few moments, neither spoke. Then Richard surprised him. I owe you an apology. Porter remained silent. Richard continued. I should have recognized your contribution earlier. Interesting. Not because of the apology, because Richard rarely apologized at all. Executives often preferred explanations. Apologies required ownership. Richard sat across from him. The compliance review is ongoing. Porter nodded. I understand. But some things are already clear. Silence followed. Then Richard spoke carefully. The North Star system is yours. Not legally, not rhetorically, factually. The statement landed with quiet weight. Porter simply nodded. Richard studied him, almost waiting for a reaction. None came. Eventually he smiled. You really are impossible to impress. Not impossible. What does it take? Porter considered briefly. Accurate information. Richard laughed, the first genuine laugh of the meeting. Then he opened a folder. Several documents appeared. North Star revenue projections, implementation schedules, expansion forecasts. The numbers were substantial, very substantial. We need you leading implementation. Porter reviewed the documents. Leading technically, no. Richard leaned forward. Leading. The distinction mattered. A lot. For years, Porter had served as support, advisor, analyst, contributor, never decision-maker. Richard continued. The client specifically requested you. Porter noticed the wording. Requested. Not recommended. Not suggested. Requested. That carried influence. The CEO slid another document across the table. Presentation authorization, implementation leadership review, executive briefing agenda. A date was highlighted. Next Tuesday. You'll present the implementation strategy. Porter looked up. To North Star. To North Star and Meridian leadership. Silence settled between them. Richard watched carefully, measuring, evaluating, trying to determine whether Porter understood the significance. He did. Perfectly. Not because it represented recognition, because it represented responsibility. The real version of Root Pulse would finally be explained by the person who built it. No filters, no intermediaries, no borrowed expertise. Just facts. Richard folded his hands. We need this done correctly. It will be. I know. The answer came quickly, without hesitation, without doubt. That detail caught Porter's attention, because Richard sounded completely certain. Not hopeful. Certain. The meeting ended shortly afterward. As Porter walked back toward the elevator, Seattle stretched beneath him through massive glass windows. Clouds drifted over the city. Ferries crossed Elliott Bay. People hurried through streets far below. Normal life. Unaware of any of this. The elevator doors opened. Porter stepped inside. For several seconds, he stood alone, thinking. The situation had changed again. Not because Derek was losing influence, not because compliance was investigating. Because the client had made a choice, a very public choice. North Star wanted the person who actually understood the system. And next week, Porter Gonzales would stand in front of executives from both companies and explain Root Pulse himself. Somewhere else in the building, people were still discussing the investigation. Still discussing Derek. Still discussing blame. Porter wasn't interested in any of it. His attention remained fixed on the presentation ahead. Because once that meeting happened, one thing would become impossible to deny. The real architect was finally stepping onto the stage. The presentation was scheduled for Tuesday at 9 a.m. By 7:15, Porter was already inside Meridian Harbor's Executive Conference Center. Not because he was nervous, because preparation had always been his version of confidence. The room looked different from the one Derek had used weeks earlier. This wasn't a client review. This was a strategic implementation summit. North Star executives would attend. Meridian leadership would attend. Operations teams from multiple states would attend remotely. The decisions made here would determine whether Root Pulse expanded nationwide. Outside the conference room windows, Seattle glowed beneath a rare stretch of blue sky. Inside, technicians tested microphones. Presentation screens flickered. Coffee stations filled with executives who preferred caffeine to punctuality. Porter sat alone reviewing final notes. Not slides. Notes. The slides barely mattered. He knew the system better than anyone alive. At 8:42, Emily Carter arrived. Unlike most executives, she carried no entourage, no assistant, no stack of folders, just a tablet and a notebook. She noticed Porter immediately. Ready? Porter looked up. Yes, Emily nodded. No motivational speech. No unnecessary encouragement. Just acknowledgement. Then she took her seat. One by one, the room filled. Regional operations directors, finance executives, implementation managers, warehouse leadership. Nearly 40 people in total. Several joined remotely from distribution centers around the country. Richard Sloan entered at 8:58. The room settled. Conversations stopped. Laptops opened. Attention focused forward. Richard stepped to the front. "Thank you, everyone." A brief welcome followed. Then he reached the final sentence, the important one. "Today, you'll hear directly from the architect of the Root Pulse framework." No elaborate introduction. No corporate language. Just one word. Architect. Porter noticed several executives exchange glances. Others looked toward him immediately. The meaning was impossible to miss. Richard stepped aside. The floor belonged to Porter. He stood, walked to the front of the room, connected his laptop. The first slide appeared. Simple, clean. No dramatic branding. No oversized logos. No executive buzzwords. Just one title. Root Pulse National Implementation Strategy. Below it, prepared by Porter Gonzales. For a moment, the room remained silent. Then Porter began. Not with statistics, not with promises, with a story. 4 months ago, North Star believed it had a transportation problem. Several executives nodded, because they remembered. Porter continued. The transportation issue was real. It just wasn't the cause. The next slide appeared. A single image. The Denver distribution hub. Nothing flashy, just context. The bottleneck existed here. He explained what he had discovered. Warehouse congestion, processing delays, inventory accumulation, how those problems created downstream transportation failures, how executives had spent 2 years treating symptoms, how the actual issue remained hidden. The explanation was simple, direct, understandable. That was what surprised people most. Complex systems often sounded complicated when described poorly. Porter described them clearly. Questions that once required 20 slides suddenly required 2. Confusion disappeared. Patterns emerged. The room leaned forward. Even Richard Sloan noticed it. People weren't merely listening. They were understanding. 30 minutes passed quickly, then 40, then 50. The implementation strategy unfolded step by step. Facility selection, deployment phases, resource allocation, forecast integration, risk mitigation. Nothing exaggerated, nothing oversold. Every claim supported by data, every projection supported by evidence. The difference between Porter and Derek became increasingly obvious. Derek had presented confidence. Porter presented understanding. One looked impressive, the other worked. By 10:02, the question session began. This time nobody hesitated. Hands immediately rose. Operations directors wanted details. Regional managers wanted clarification. Financial executives wanted projections. Porter answered each question calmly. Precisely. Without consulting notes. Because the system existed inside his head long before it existed inside PowerPoint. One logistics manager from Phoenix asked about inventory volatility. Porter explained the model. Another executive from Atlanta challenged implementation timelines. Porter explained the assumptions. A finance director questioned projected savings. Porter walked through the calculations. Not one answer required improvisation. The room noticed. Emily noticed most of all. At one point, she simply sat back and watched, observing the same thing everyone else was beginning to realize. This wasn't someone presenting a project. This was someone explaining his own work, a distinction impossible to fake. Then came the moment nobody expected, including Porter. Near the back of the room sat an empty chair, a chair that hadn't been empty at the start. About halfway through the presentation, Derek Whitmore had entered quietly. No introduction, no announcement, just silent arrival. Porter noticed him immediately. Most people did. The room felt the shift. Not because Derek said anything, because everyone knew, or at least suspected. The investigation had become impossible to ignore. Derek remained silent throughout the presentation, watching, listening, observing the same reality everyone else observed. Questions came. Answers followed. Again and again. Every answer reinforced the same conclusion. The expertise belonged to Porter, not the title, not the presentation, the expertise. At 10:37, Emily asked a question, not because she needed the answer, because she wanted everyone else to hear it. Porter? Yes? What was the hardest part of building Root Pulse? The wording mattered. Building, not managing, not overseeing, building. Porter thought for a moment, then answered honestly, finding the right problem. The room grew quiet. He continued. Most systems fail because people focus on visible symptoms. Emily nodded. Porter gestured toward the screen. The data wasn't hiding the truth. He paused. People were looking in the wrong place. Silence followed. A meaningful silence, because everyone understood the statement worked on more than one level. Emily smiled faintly. No further explanation was necessary. The meeting continued. At 11:05, the final slide appeared. Projected national deployment timeline, estimated savings, implementation milestones, everything clear, everything realistic, everything achievable. Porter finished. No dramatic ending, no inspirational quote, just facts. Then he stepped away from the podium. For a second, nobody moved. Then applause began. Not polite applause, not obligatory applause. Real applause. The kind earned through competence. The kind Porter rarely sought. The kind he never forgot. Across the room, several North Star executives stood. Others followed. Within moments, much of the room was on its feet. Richard Sloan applauded. Emily Carter applauded. Regional directors applauded. Operations managers applauded. Even some remote attendees appeared on screen, clapping from warehouses hundreds of miles away. Porter stood quietly, slightly uncomfortable. Recognition had never been his preferred environment. Still, he accepted it, because the applause wasn't really about him. It was about clarity, truth, results, the things that survived politics. Eventually, the room settled. Emily stood. I have one final announcement. Everyone turned toward her. She glanced briefly at Porter, then addressed the room. North Star has approved expansion into all remaining target facilities. A murmur spread instantly. The number appeared on screen. Projected contract value. Several $million larger than the original agreement. A major victory. For Meridian. For North Star. For everyone involved. Except, perhaps, one person. Porter glanced toward the back of the room. Derek remained seated. Silent. Expression unreadable. No anger, no argument, no defense, because public humiliation had never been necessary. Reality had done the work on its own. The meeting concluded shortly afterward. Executives gathered their materials. Conversations erupted throughout the room. Plans, timelines, next steps, momentum. As Porter disconnected his laptop, Richard Sloan approached. The CEO waited until most people had left, then spoke quietly. Can you stay for a few minutes? Porter looked up. Richard's expression carried unusual seriousness. Not concern, not celebration. Something else. Something important. Of course, Richard nodded. Good. The CEO glanced toward the closed conference room doors, then back toward Porter. There's something we need to discuss. The conference room emptied slowly. Voices faded into hallways. Remote participants disconnected one by one. Coffee cups disappeared. Presentation screens went dark. Within minutes, only 3 people remained: Richard Sloan, Janice Hollowell, Porter Gonzales. That alone told Porter the conversation ahead would not be routine. Richard closed the conference room door himself. A small gesture, yet meaningful. Executives rarely handled doors personally. Janice placed a thin black folder on the table. Unlike Porter's blue North or Star folder, this one belonged to compliance. Official, corporate, permanent. The sight of it immediately changed the atmosphere. Richard sat across from Porter. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then Janice opened the folder. The internal review has concluded. Direct, as always. Porter listened. Janice continued. Several findings were confirmed. No dramatic language, no emotion, just facts. The way Porter preferred. She slid a document across the table. Investigation summary. Several paragraphs had been highlighted. Porter reviewed them carefully. The conclusions were clear. Project authorship misrepresentation. Removal of documented attribution. Misleading client-facing statements. Violation of internal ethics standards. Violation of professional conduct policies. Each finding was supported by evidence. The same evidence Porter had collected. The same evidence Derek had underestimated. Richard leaned back slightly. We expanded the review beyond North Star. Porter looked up. That was unexpected. Janice nodded. The evidence suggested additional examination was warranted. The statement carried implications, serious ones. Porter waited. Janice opened another section of the file. Additional projects appeared. Different clients, different years, different teams. A pattern emerged. Not identical to North Star, but familiar. Repeated instances where credit appeared to drift upward. Ideas detached from original creators. Recognition redistributed. Some cases lacked sufficient documentation. Others didn't. Porter felt no satisfaction reading it. Only understanding. People rarely behaved differently under pressure. They usually behaved more intensely. The North Star situation hadn't created Derek's habits. It had exposed them. Richard spoke quietly. Several former employees were contacted. Porter nodded. Janice continued. Their statements were consistent with documented findings. Silence settled across the room. Heavy, not dramatic, just real. Richard finally said the part everyone already understood. Derek Whitmore is no longer employed by Meridian Harbor Consulting. The sentence arrived without ceremony. No anger, no celebration, no triumph. Just consequence. Porter accepted it with a small nod. Nothing more. Richard noticed. Of course he noticed. The CEO had spent weeks watching Porter refuse every opportunity for emotional retaliation. Now, even at the conclusion, the reaction remained unchanged. Richard shook his head slightly. I don't think I've ever met anyone quite like you. Porter almost smiled. I'm not sure whether that's good or bad. Richard laughed quietly. Neither do I. The conversation shifted. Away from Derek, toward the future. Janice closed the investigation file. Her role in the matter was largely complete. Richard opened another folder, this one thicker, more optimistic. Several documents appeared, organizational charts, compensation reports, leadership proposals. Porter immediately understood. Promotion discussions. Richard spoke first. The board reviewed North Star's expansion approval yesterday. Porter listened. The client specifically credited your work. Richard paused. Multiple times. Not surprising. Emily Carter rarely softened facts. Richard continued. Your presentation accelerated the rollout decision. Another document slid across the table. Senior Director Logistics Transformation. The title sat near the top. Beneath it appeared salary figures, authority levels, reporting structures, a significant promotion. A very significant promotion. Richard watched carefully. Most employees would react instantly. Excitement, relief, validation. Porter simply read, line by line, page by page, exactly as he had reviewed every piece of evidence, carefully, methodically. When he finished, Richard smiled. Well, Porter placed the document on the table, then asked a question. Not about salary, not about title, not about office size, a different question. What authority comes with the role? Richard blinked, not the reaction he expected. Porter continued. If implementation decisions are challenged, who has final approval? Interesting? Very interesting. Richard exchanged a glance with Janice, because the question revealed something important. Porter wasn't negotiating prestige, he was evaluating effectiveness. The CEO answered honestly. Currently executive leadership. Porter nodded, then asked another question. What guarantees exist regarding project attribution? Richard sat back. Now he understood. Porter wasn't interested in rewards. Not primarily. He was interested in structure, the system, the same thing he'd always focused on. Richard leaned forward. What are you asking for? Porter answered calmly. Written authority. Silence. Then he continued. Defined implementation ownership. Another pause. Documented authorship standards. Richard listened. Porter finished. And compensation aligned with responsibility. No emotion, no demands, just clarity. The same clarity he applied to data models, the same clarity he applied to investigations. The CEO slowly smiled. Not because the request was unreasonable, because it was smart. Very smart. Most people negotiated status. Porter negotiated sustainability. Richard glanced toward Janice. The compliance officer spoke for the first time in several minutes. Those requests are entirely appropriate, Richard laughed softly. Of course they are. The next hour became negotiation. Professional, respectful, detailed, role definitions, decision authority, compensation structure, attribution requirements, implementation governance, every point documented, every point reviewed. By the end, the proposed position looked significantly different. Stronger, clearer, protected. Richard finally signed the preliminary approval sheet, then pushed it across the table. Happy? Porter considered the question, then answered honestly. It's a good start. Richard laughed again. A genuine laugh this time. The meeting concluded shortly afterward. Janice left first. Her work finished. Richard remained behind. As Porter gathered his documents, the CEO spoke one final time. Can I ask something? Sure. Richard folded his hands. Why didn't you leave? The question surprised him. Richard continued. A lot of people would have. Porter understood. The investigation, the stolen credit, the frustration, the years of being overlooked. Any one of those reasons could justify leaving. Porter thought for a moment, then answered, because I wanted the facts to finish speaking first. Richard sat quietly, absorbing the answer. Eventually he nodded. Fair enough. Porter left the conference room. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the office floor. Employees worked normally. Meetings continued. Deadlines remained. Life moved forward. Yet something felt different. Not because Derek was gone, because perception had changed. People looked at Porter differently now. Managers greeted him differently. Executives acknowledged him. Colleagues asked questions. Visibility had arrived. Strangely, Porter found it uncomfortable. Noah noticed immediately. You got offered something. Porter raised an eyebrow. How do you know? You have the face people make when they're pretending nothing happened. Porter laughed. Rare, but real. Noah pointed dramatically. There it is. What? Proof you're human. The conversation continued for several minutes, light, normal, a welcome change. Then Noah asked something unexpected. What are you going to do? Porter looked toward the windows. Seattle shimmered beneath afternoon sunlight. The city looked peaceful, distant, full of possibilities. For the first time in weeks, he didn't immediately know the answer, because another possibility had quietly entered the picture. One he hadn't discussed with anyone. Not Richard, not Noah, not even himself. The possibility appeared in the form of a short message waiting in his inbox. Sender Emily Carter. Subject, future opportunity. Porter stared at it briefly, then closed the screen. The promotion meeting had ended. The investigation had ended, but something told him the story wasn't finished. Not yet. Because sometimes recognition arrived at the exact moment another door opened. And Emily Carter rarely sent emails without a reason. Porter waited until evening before opening Emily Carter's email. Not because he lacked curiosity, because he preferred finishing one decision before beginning another. By 6 o'clock, most employees had gone home. The 14th floor had become quiet again. The same quiet that had accompanied the creation of Root Pulse months earlier. The same quiet Porter trusted. He opened the message. As expected, Emily did not waste words. Porter North Star is creating a new logistics transformation division. We'd like to discuss whether you would be interested in leading it. If you're open to a conversation, let me know. Emily, no salary figures, no recruitment pitch, no exaggerated promises. Just an invitation. That alone told Porter the opportunity was serious. Emily Carter understood credibility. She didn't sell possibilities. She presented them. Porter read the message twice, then closed it. Across the darkened office, city lights reflected against the windows. For the first time in weeks, the future looked uncertain. Not in a bad way, in an open way. A week later, he met Emily for lunch. Not in a corporate boardroom, not at North Star headquarters, at a quiet restaurant overlooking Lake Union, the kind of place where conversations mattered more than appearances. Emily arrived exactly on time, as always. After ordering lunch, she got straight to the point. We want you. Porter almost smiled. That sounds direct. It is. Emily folded her hands. We've spent years hiring consultants. Porter listened. Most explain problems. She paused. You solve them. The statement carried no flattery, only observation. Emily continued. The board approved a new transformation division after the Root Pulse rollout. She slid a document across the table. Porter reviewed it. Director of Logistics Transformation. National scope. Direct operational authority. Significant budget. Significant responsibility. The salary alone exceeded anything Meridian Harbor had ever offered him. Emily watched quietly while he read. When he finished, she asked only one question. What do you think? Porter looked through the restaurant windows toward the water. Boats moved slowly across the lake. The city skyline stood beyond them. Seattle had been home for most of his life. The decision wasn't simple. I think it's a serious offer. Emily nodded. It is. Neither pushed further. The conversation shifted toward implementation plans, future logistics trends, operational strategy, real work. Exactly the kind of discussion Porter enjoyed. Yet even after lunch ended, the offer remained in his thoughts. Days passed, then another week. Meridian Harbor finalized his promotion package. Executives congratulated him. New responsibilities appeared. New authority appeared. Everything he had requested was approved. Objectively, he should have been satisfied, and in many ways he was. Still, something felt unfinished, not unresolved. Unfinished. One Saturday morning, Porter drove south toward Tacoma. The trip wasn't planned, at least not consciously. His hands simply turned the steering wheel toward familiar roads. 40 minutes later, he parked outside a small house he hadn't visited in months. The house had belonged to his father, a construction contractor who spent most of his life building things nobody noticed. Foundations, support structures, load-bearing systems, the parts hidden behind walls, the parts people depended on without ever seeing. Porter sat on the front porch for a long time. No phone, no laptop, no meetings. Just memories. His father had died 5 years earlier. Yet some lessons remained unusually clear. One memory surfaced above the others. Porter was 16. Frustrated, angry. Someone at school had taken credit for work he'd done. He remembered complaining about it all evening. His father listened patiently, then said something Porter never forgot. If somebody steals your shadow, keep walking. At 16, the advice sounded ridiculous. Porter hadn't understood it. Eventually, he asked why. His father smiled. Because your shadow only exists when you're moving forward. The memory lingered, even now, especially now. The problem with resentment was that it kept people facing backward. Porter understood that better than ever. He sat quietly until sunset, watching light fade across the neighborhood, thinking. Not about Derek, not about the investigation, not about the promotion, about direction. When he finally drove home, the answer felt clearer. 2 days later, Emily called. Have you decided? Porter looked through his office window. Employees moved across the floor below. Meetings continued, projects advanced, life carried on. Yes, silence. Then Emily asked, and Porter smiled slightly, I'm interested. Emily laughed. Not loudly, just enough. I was hoping you'd say that. The formal discussions began immediately. Contracts, compensation, transition planning, reporting structures. The process moved quickly. North Star wanted him in place before the national rollout expanded. Richard Sloan learned about the offer soon afterward. The CEO called Porter into his office. Unlike previous meetings, this one felt personal. Richard closed the door, then sat in quietly for several seconds. You got recruited? Porter nodded. Looks that way. Richard sighed. Not dramatically, just honestly. I can't blame them. Porter remained silent. Richard leaned back. You know I want you to stay. I know. And yet I don't think you're going to. Porter smiled. Probably not. The CEO nodded. Acceptance arrived surprisingly quickly, perhaps because Richard understood something. Sometimes good leaders earned opportunities elsewhere. Keeping them wasn't always possible. Eventually, Richard asked, Was it the investigation? No. The promotion issue? No. Richard looked genuinely curious. Then what? Porter thought carefully. The answer mattered. It isn't about leaving Meridian. Richard listened. It's about building something new. Silence followed. Then Richard slowly smiled. The kind of smile that appears when an unpleasant truth also happens to be fair. I understand. The conversation lasted another hour. Respectful, honest. When it ended, both men stood. Richard extended his hand. Porter shook it. Then the CEO said something unexpected. You know what the funny part is? What? Richard laughed softly. We spent 13 years thinking you were an analyst. Porter raised an eyebrow. And, Richard shook his head, you were always much more than that. The words stayed with Porter long after the meeting ended. Not because he needed validation, because they reflected something larger. People often saw only the role, rarely the person inside it. That evening, after everyone else had left, Porter sat alone at his desk. The office looked exactly as it had months earlier. Same monitors, same windows, same city skyline. Same quiet. Only one thing had changed: the future. He opened a blank document, placed his hands on the keyboard, then stopped. For several moments he simply stared at the screen. 13 years, thousands of meetings, countless projects, long nights, quiet victories, invisible contributions. Everything led here. Finally, he began typing. The first words appeared slowly: professional, respectful, final, resignation letter. Outside the windows, Seattle's lights stretched into the distance. Inside, Porter Gonzales started writing the next chapter of his life. Porter's resignation became official on a Monday morning. No dramatic announcement, no company-wide email, no farewell speech, just a signed document delivered to Human Resources and copied to executive leadership. Professional, simple, final. By lunchtime, however, everyone knew news traveled quickly inside consulting firms, especially news involving people who had suddenly become visible. Porter noticed the difference immediately. Employees who had barely spoken to him for years now stopped by his desk. Some offered congratulations. Others expressed surprise. A few looked genuinely disappointed. The reactions varied. The respect felt new. And perhaps that was the strangest part. For years, Porter had walked through the same hallways unnoticed. Now people seemed determined to remember him before he left. The irony wasn't lost on him. Tuesday morning brought another unexpected visitor: Richard Sloan. The CEO rarely left the executive floor. This time he walked directly to Porter's desk. The entire section noticed. Conversations stopped, keyboards slowed, people pretended not to watch. Nobody succeeded. Richard stood beside the workstation. "You have a minute?" Of course. They moved into a nearby conference room. The door closed behind them. Richard sat down and exhaled. "You know I'm supposed to make one final attempt." Porter smiled slightly. "To keep me—" "Exactly." The CEO leaned back. "We can improve compensation." Porter listened. "We can expand authority." He nodded. "We can build an entire division around Root Pulse." Porter appreciated the effort. He really did, because Richard wasn't negotiating out of pride. He genuinely wanted him to stay. Unfortunately, some decisions weren't about money, or authority, or titles. Eventually, Porter spoke. "I'm grateful." Richard smiled. "I know. But my decision hasn't changed." The CEO looked disappointed. Not surprised, just disappointed. After a moment, he laughed quietly. "At least you considered it." "I did." Richard stood, then extended his hand. Again, not as employer and employee, as professionals, as equals. Porter shook it. "North Star made a good choice." The words carried sincerity. That mattered. When Richard left the room, the conversation felt complete. No unfinished business, no resentment, just closure. The remainder of the week passed quickly. Transition meetings filled his calendar, knowledge transfer sessions, implementation briefings, technical documentation reviews. Porter completed each task carefully, the same way he completed everything else. No shortcuts, no loose ends. One afternoon, Noah Bennett appeared carrying a notebook. The younger analyst looked unusually serious. "Got a minute?" Porter nodded. Noah sat down. For several seconds, he seemed unsure how to begin. Finally, he spoke. "I wanted to say thanks." Porter looked up. "For what?" Noah laughed softly. "Honestly." He gestured toward the office around them. "Everything." Porter raised an eyebrow. Noah continued. When this whole thing started, I thought you were crazy. Reasonable assessment. I'm serious. Noah shook his head. I kept waiting for you to lose your temper. Porter smiled. So did some other people. But you never did. The younger analyst paused, searching for the right words, then found them. You showed me something. Porter remained quiet. Noah continued. Documentation matters. A small nod. Preparation matters. Another. And sometimes being right isn't enough. Porter listened. You have to be able to prove you're right. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, reflective. Eventually, Porter smiled. That's a useful lesson. Noah laughed. An expensive one. Most good lessons are. They talked for nearly an hour. About consulting, about careers, about mistakes, about professional reputation. The conversation felt strangely important, perhaps because Noah represented something Porter rarely considered. The next generation. People who would face their own versions of the same challenges, different circumstances, same principles. When Noah finally left, he carried more than advice. He carried perspective. And that mattered. Friday arrived, Porter's final day. Seattle greeted the morning with clear skies and sunlight, a rare gift. The office seemed quieter than usual, not because fewer people were present, because everyone knew what day it was. Several employees stopped by before lunch. Some shared memories. Others shared stories. A few apologized for things they hadn't noticed earlier. Porter accepted every conversation graciously. Not because he needed validation, because people were trying to be sincere. That deserved respect. Around 2 o'clock, a small gathering appeared near the break area. Nothing extravagant. Coffee, pastries, a modest farewell event. Exactly the kind Porter preferred. Richard attended. Several executives attended. Even Janice Hollowell appeared briefly. The compliance officer rarely attended social events. Her presence alone said plenty. When it came time for someone to speak, Richard stepped forward. The CEO looked around the room, then at Porter. Most people think leadership comes from position. Silence followed. Richard shook his head. Sometimes it comes from character. Several employees nodded. Others looked toward Porter. Richard continued. Porter reminded all of us of that. No dramatic applause, no standing ovation, just quiet appreciation, which somehow felt more meaningful. The gathering ended shortly afterward. Employees returned to work. Meetings resumed. Normal life continued, as it always did. Near the end of the day, Porter packed the final items from his desk, a framed photograph, a few notebooks, several technical books, nothing more. He had never accumulated much. The blue North Star folder was long gone, stored permanently within compliance archives. Its purpose fulfilled. At 4:47 p.m., Porter carried a small box toward the elevators. The route took him past Conference Room B. He stopped briefly. The room looked ordinary. Empty chairs, dark screens, silent walls. Yet this was where Derek had first presented Root Pulse as his own, where applause had rewarded the wrong person, where the story had seemed to end. Porter studied the room for several moments, not with bitterness, not with satisfaction, with perspective. Because the room itself hadn't mattered. The presentation hadn't mattered, even Derek hadn't mattered as much as people believed. The real turning point had been evidence, patience, documentation, truth. Those things remained. Everything else faded. Eventually he continued walking. The elevator carried him to the lobby. His box rested beside him. The same building, the same elevators, the same view. Yet everything felt different. Outside sunlight reflected from glass towers. People hurried along sidewalks. Traffic flowed through downtown Seattle. Porter stepped into the parking garage. Third level, Section C. His old Toyota Camry waited exactly where it always did. One last time. Before opening the car door, his phone vibrated. A calendar notification appeared. Sender Emily Carter. Subject welcome to North Star. Porter opened it. The first meeting invitation for his new role. Monday, 8 a.m. Logistics Transformation Division. Director Porter Gonzales. He looked at the screen for several seconds, then smiled. Not broadly, just enough. Because after months of conflict investigations, presentations, and decisions, something unexpected had arrived. Peace, not victory, not revenge. Peace. Porter placed the box inside the passenger seat, started the engine, and drove away from Meridian Harbor Consulting for the last time. Ahead waited a new company, a new challenge, a new chapter. And for the first time in many years, nobody else would be standing between his work and his name. 6 months later, Root Pulse no longer belonged to a single warehouse. It no longer belonged to a single region. And it certainly no longer belonged to a PowerPoint presentation. The system operated across North Star Freight Systems' national network, 12 major distribution centers, thousands of employees, millions of inventory movements. What began as a neglected recovery project had become one of the most successful operational transformations in company history. Porter Gonzales arrived at North Star headquarters just before sunrise. The building stood on the edge of downtown Seattle overlooking Elliott Bay. Most executives preferred private parking spaces. Porter still parked farther away than necessary. Old habits survived promotions. His office sat on the 9th floor. Large windows, simple furniture, no oversized desk, no executive trophies, no framed awards, just monitors, whiteboards, operational maps, the things he actually used. The title on the door read, Porter Gonzales, Director of Logistics Transformation. He rarely looked at it. Titles mattered less than outcomes. The first meeting of the day began at 7:30. Regional managers joined remotely from facilities across the country. Denver, Phoenix, Atlanta, Dallas, Nashville, Chicago. Warehouses that once struggled now reported performance metrics that seemed almost impossible compared to a year earlier. Porter reviewed the dashboard. Average delivery delays had fallen dramatically. Inventory congestion had dropped. Forecast accuracy continued improving. The numbers spoke clearly. The system worked. Not perfectly. Nothing ever did, but it worked. One regional director smiled through a video screen. We just completed our third consecutive quarter above target. Another manager nodded. We haven't had a major inventory bottleneck in 5 months. A third joined. Root Pulse flagged a forecasting issue last week. We corrected it before customers ever noticed. The comments continued. Evidence, results, facts. Exactly the things Porter trusted most. After the meeting ended, he remained alone in the conference room for a few moments, watching data scroll across the screen. Months earlier, he had built the first version at night inside a nearly empty office. Now, the same ideas influenced decisions across an entire national logistics network. The scale felt different. The principles didn't. Around mid-morning, Emily Carter stopped by. She rarely scheduled unnecessary meetings. Today wasn't an exception. She carried a report, placed it on the table, then sat down. No emergency. Porter smiled slightly. That's usually good news. Emily nodded. The board wanted a summary. She slid the report across the table. The numbers filled several pages. Projected annual savings, operational improvements, customer retention increases. The total impact exceeded even the most optimistic early forecasts. Several $1 million, possibly more. Emily watched him review the report. Eventually she said something unusual. "You know they're talking about you." Porter looked up. "That's unfortunate," Emily laughed. A genuine laugh. "You still haven't gotten used to recognition." "Probably not." Emily leaned back. "The board asked how we found you." "Interesting question." Porter considered it briefly, then answered, "You didn't find me." Emily smiled. "Exactly." That was the truth. Nobody had discovered hidden talent. The talent had always existed. People simply stopped overlooking it. A subtle but important difference. The rest of the day passed quickly. Meetings, planning sessions, implementation reviews, normal work, the kind Porter preferred. Around 2 o'clock, he conducted a training session for newly hired analysts. One of his favorite responsibilities. 20 young professionals filled the room, most early in their careers. Ambitious, intelligent, still learning how organizations actually worked. The presentation topic focused on project governance, documentation, operational accountability. Not particularly exciting subjects, yet Porter understood their importance better than anyone. He stood before the room. A simple slide appeared. Document everything. Several analysts smiled. Others laughed softly. One raised a hand. "Isn't that a little extreme?" Porter smiled. "No." The room laughed. Then he explained. Not the investigation, not Derek, not the stolen credit. The lesson beneath those events. Records matter, processes matter, facts matter. The younger analysts listened carefully, because experience often sounded simple after it had been earned. One analyst asked another question. "What if someone takes credit for your work?" The room became quiet. Porter paused briefly. A different version of himself might have answered differently. Months earlier, perhaps. Now the answer felt obvious. Keep doing good work. Several people looked confused. Porter continued. And keep records. The confusion remained, so he elaborated. The truth doesn't always move quickly. Silence. But it usually arrives. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then, several analysts began taking notes. The lesson landed. Not because it sounded dramatic, because it sounded true. That evening, Porter stayed late. Not unusually late, just long enough to finish several reports. The office gradually emptied. Employees headed home. Lights dimmed. Quiet returned. Some things never changed. Around 6:45 p.m., he opened a presentation scheduled for the following morning. A national rollout review. Senior leadership would attend. Board representatives would attend. Important meeting. Routine preparation. The first slide appeared. Porter paused. Not because of the content, because of the name. There it was. Exactly where it belonged. Prepared. By Porter Gonzales, Director of Logistics Transformation, Simple. Ordinary. Accurate. Months earlier, seeing his name on a slide would have felt like vindication. Now, it felt normal. The difference mattered. Recognition stopped feeling extraordinary once it became truthful. He reviewed the remaining materials, forecasts, expansion plans, performance summaries. Everything looked ready. Outside the windows, the sun began sinking toward the horizon. Golden light spread across Elliott Bay. Ferries moved slowly across the water. Seattle glowed beneath the fading sky. Porter closed the presentation, then stood. The office around him had become completely silent. No meetings, no conversations, no politics. Just peace. He walked toward the windows. For several moments, he simply looked out across the city. The journey replayed briefly in his mind. The abandoned project, the late nights, the renamed slides, the conference room, the investigation, the promotion, the resignation. Every step connected. Not through luck, not through revenge, through patience, preparation, documentation, truth. The things his father had valued, the things Porter had trusted. His phone buzzed. A message appeared. From Noah Bennett, still working at Meridian Harbor, still building his career. The message was short. Just got promoted. Thought you'd appreciate that. Porter smiled, then replied, Congratulations. Keep records. A moment later, Noah answered, Never forgetting that lesson. Porter laughed quietly, then slipped the phone into his pocket. Outside, the last edge of sunlight touched the water. Inside, he returned to his desk, closed his laptop. The screen faded to black. For years, people had mistaken silence for weakness. They had mistaken humility for insignificance. They had mistaken visibility for value. The truth had been simpler. A quiet man had built something important. Someone else tried to claim it. Facts refused to cooperate. And eventually, reality found its way to the surface. Porter picked up his jacket, turned off the final light, and walked toward the elevator. No longer invisible, no longer underestimated, no longer carrying anyone else's name above his work. Just Porter Gonzales, exactly where he belonged. Some people believe justice arrives through confrontation. Others believe the loudest voice eventually wins. This story suggests something different. Porter never defeated dishonesty by shouting louder. He won because he understood that preparation outlasts emotion. When credit was stolen, he didn't rush toward revenge. He built a record. He trusted facts. And when the moment arrived, the truth was already organized and ready to speak for itself. Many people watching have probably experienced something similar. Maybe your work was ignored. Maybe someone else received recognition you earned. Maybe you've been underestimated because you were quiet, patient, or unwilling to play political games. Those moments can make you feel invisible, but being overlooked and being without value are not the same thing. Real value exists whether people recognize it immediately or not. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had someone take credit for your work or try to rewrite the truth? What happened, and how did you handle it? Your experience might help someone else going through the same situation right now. And if you enjoy stories about resilience, quiet strength, and people who overcome unfair situations through patience and intelligence, make sure you subscribe. Tomorrow's story features another underestimated man who discovers that the people laughing at him never understood what he was building behind the scenes.